Hey, welcome to your Bible questions answered. I'm looking forward to getting into them. Before I do, I want to remind you that you can give to this ministry. You can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give the equivalent of a price of a coffee, or you can give more if you want. Thank you. Really do appreciate it. Huge shout out to my patrons already. Thank you guys. It makes such a difference. So thank you so much for that. Also, we're going to Israel in 2024. So go to thewaycongregation.com to get more information. If you're wondering how you can submit a question, you can get the Way Congregation app and you can submit that in the messaging feature where it says Bible questions answered, or you can do it right here on the show live. And I will do my very best to get to those. So I'm looking forward to getting to those questions. All right, I'm going to start here in the chat, and then I'm going to go back to the app so that we kind of mix it up a little bit. This is Seeker of Truth. Some say temple will be rebuilt and sacrifices will start again. What steps, as per Torah, would be needed for legitimate temple to be rebuilt and valid sacrifices to begin? So, good question, Seeker of Truth. The main thing, of course, obviously, besides building it, according to the specifications that are found in the Scripture, right? So you have to have the place where the altar is going to be. The Bible says how to make it. Cannot have steps. It's got to have a ramp. All right. So those are some of the things that need to happen. And then obviously the holy place. You got to have the showbread, the lampstands, and you have to have the altar of incense inside, and then you have the Holy of Holies inside of there. So that's all of the basic construction that would need to happen. But in order to make it legit, you need to have the ashes of a red heifer. And that is why many people have been quite excited every time we hear about a red heifer that has been grown. All right. And sometimes they're like, wait a second, what makes it actually red? Well, it's a cow, okay, that has very red hair. And the rabbis have kind of come to some basic formulas as to how much, I don't know, how red it really has to be. Can it have any white hairs? I mean, if it has one white hair, is it still considered red? Sure. Is it has two white hairs, three white hairs, right? So I think they've done a pretty good job of determining, well, this is still red enough, okay? And I would tend to agree with them in those areas. And so we're looking for what we call a kosher red heifer. In other words, one that meets the biblical criteria of what is red without being just a little bit too white. All right. And once you have that, and then of course you have a temple, then you would need to sacrifice that heifer, burn it, right? And then take the ashes, and then you use the ashes for the dedication of the temple. So that is what is necessary for there to be a temple. Now, the Temple Institute in Jerusalem has also spent a lot of time and a lot of money in figuring out, what they would need to have, all the vestments, the utensils, right? So they've already done a huge amount of work. I think that, let's say they got the green light tomorrow. I think they could probably have a functioning temple, or at least a functioning holy place. Maybe not a fancy building, but at least some kind of a working tabernacle. I think they could have that probably within a month. That would be my guess. But then, of course, that would be assuming they have the red heifer, right? So all of these things would need to take place in order for that to come to pass. All right, another question here, and then I'm going to jump back to the app. All right, this is from Tyler. What do you think of the new 10 Commandments declared on Mount Sinai, and they broke tablets on it just like Moses? More blasphemy. I think I'm not quite following what you're saying there, Tyler. Declared on Mount Sinai. So I'm only aware of the 10 Commandments that were spoken on Mount Sinai. I don't know of any new 10 Commandments that were spoken on Mount Sinai. So, right, I mean, you shall have no other gods before me, right? Make no graven images, don't take my name in vain, keep the Sabbath, honor your parents, etc. Right? So those are the 10 Commandments as I know them. If you know of another set, maybe let me know. I sure hope there isn't. I think that's a great set of commandments. So I'm going to stick with that. All right, let me get to some of those questions now that we have in the app. Okay, this is from Legacy. This is about his work, and he says that he has an employee that does great work, but she is very much into what's the word here? Sorry, I'm looking. There's a particular word, ancestral worship. So, and he says it has negatively influenced our work environment. So, uh, the question here currently with her employed here, it seems like that's all they talk about. Question: what should I do? Um, well, that is of course a challenging question. Legacy. I think part of it's going to determine what the laws are in the land regarding that. But I think you could just sit down, maybe not so much as, hey, I'm your boss, I'm about to fire you unless you do what I tell you, but more as, sort of a peer to peer and say, I don't feel comfortable with some of the things that you're doing regarding this ancestral worship. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I believe it's bringing a negative environment, negative impact or influence to our work environment. And I would like to sit down and talk with you and see how we could resolve this. I think that might be uh, a way to go. I know that that in itself has its challenges because if you do later decide to let this person go, uh, at least here in the States, they would probably come back and sue you, right? So it's always challenging to know how to do that. But, maybe, again, I don't know how much you've actually talked with this woman about this ancestral worship, but maybe ask her, what does this really mean to you? Could it be that maybe is there maybe some confusion on your part? Maybe is it? I mean, again, I don't know the situation, so I don't want to speak into it and say things that I just don't know. Okay, but I'm trying to just kind of speculate and help a little bit as much as I can. Is it really worshiping, like bowing down to and seeking their succor of these ancient people, or is it more of a, hey, I had some cool relatives and I'm really glad that they were around? Is that what it is? Or is it that they're praying to these people and they're hoping that the dead will somehow answer them and help them in today's world? So, first of all, I guess I would want to figure out what exactly is it that they're believing. Two, is there a chance that you could speak with this person sort of off the record and, um, just say, I don't feel comfortable with this, right? So maybe that would be a way to do that. So I hope that helps. That it really is a tricky one because that it's certainly here in the States. You'd have to navigate that very carefully. So I'd take a lot of prayer. Okay. All right. This is from Alexa. Hi, Doug. Have you heard of the theory that Song of Solomon was written by Solomon about the Queen of Sheba, specifically the first chapter referencing her hairy legs, which she was known for? I was wondering your thoughts about this. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Okay. Well, I do believe that the Song of Solomon, the book that bears his name, um, let's go there because it's such a fun book. And let's check it out. Okay, so let's see. Let me make sure I'm sharing for you guys. Oops. All right, here we go. All right, got it. All right, so the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, the banquet, and he's talking about the Shulamite. Okay, now this is, of course, a sensual book because God created all this stuff, right? Um, all right, we will run after you. The king has brought me in his chambers. Okay, now there are a lot of people, and I don't think this is wrong, that would read this book and they would very much read it metaphorically. Okay, and that's fine, right? I think there's wonderful lessons that you can learn from a metaphorical reading of this, and it's probably a little bit easier to teach in church to some degree, especially if you have a lot of little ones there and you don't feel a little awkward about talking about this stuff. On the other hand, I don't think that this is wrong at all, right? I think God created all this. And so if it's discussed in the right context of the right people, it's a great thing. All right. So do not look upon me because I am dark, because the sun has tanned me. All right. So this is a dark person, clearly someone who's darker than the average Israeli or Israelite. Okay. So, which is interesting because I've run into some Black African Israelites um, who have a very particular doctrine. Their doctrine is that they are the only legitimate descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that any fair-skinned Jewish, European, living European type Jews or New York Jews or anybody who claims to be Jewish, who is fair-skinned, has no basis whatsoever. Okay, now I disagree with them completely, and I think this is an amazing passage because here there's a contrast that is being established. Right, this woman is saying, "Hey, I'm dark. I'm not like you because I'm dark." Right, so that tells us that Solomon, whatever skin tone he had, he was a lot lighter than her. All right. And this is probably because she's from Ethiopia. And I think, if you talk to the Ethiopians, they have a long-standing tradition that the Queen of Sheba came to visit. And in fact, we have that in the Bible, right? That she came to visit. And this would be who this is talking about. And I would agree with that. So now, as far as the hairy legs, that is a little bit trickier. Now, because let's just consider this. Okay, now there is a fair amount of metaphor and comparison and imagery that's being used. So we gotta be a little bit careful, right? So follow in the footsteps of the flock and feed your little goats besides the shepherd's tent. I have compared you, my love, to my filly among Pharaoh's chariots. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with chains of gold, with studs of silver. All right, so all these things, right? My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blooms and the vineyards of En Gedi, right? All right, so again, you have dove's eyes. Well, she doesn't literally have dove's eyes, right? The beams of our houses are cedar and rafters of fir. All right, so I guess I must have missed where she supposedly has hairy legs, according to your comparison. So I guess I don't see that. I'm kind of looking for the hairy legs thing, which is kind of funny. But I'm not seeing this in chapter 1. Maybe it's in another place. So I don't know if you want to ever follow up on that question, but there's another place where he's going to liken her to her neck is like the tower, and she has little goats running around in her hair and stuff. I mean, so again, how much of that are we to take? Well, not literally, of course, we can't take it literally, but obviously there's some figurative language there. So exactly what that means, what does she exactly look like? That's a little bit tricky. But she probably, certainly, in my opinion, had dark skin and was probably an Ethiopian, and so that would give a lot of credence to what the Ethiopians have to say in their tradition. All right, this is from Diana. Regarding the second and third books of Enoch, being that they are so fallen in nature and unlike first Enoch, would you say that they were probably later Gnostic writings, or could they possibly be attributed to the Enoch from the line of Cain? I'm not alluding to serpent seed doctrine, but I do believe Cain's early line were generationally evil. Well, so these kind of books in the Second Temple period are called pseudepigrapha. Okay, so that literally means false writing. Okay, so false writing means that it wasn't Enoch who actually wrote that. Okay, so second and third Enoch being pseudepigraphic in their nature, we don't know when these were written. Obviously, I think probably in the Second Temple period, but these dates certainly people have different opinions about there. So you have basically from the 1st century BC. Some people would suggest even as late as up to the 10th century AD. All right, wow, that's pretty late if we were to take that person's suggestion. So I do think there's a lot more credibility for the book of First Enoch. Second and third, I don't put too much stock in them. They're interesting. There's no question that they're interesting. But what I do think we can glean from these, rather than trying to say that these are authentic books, I really don't believe that they are authentic books from the time of Enoch. But they could contain traces of traditions that were passed down, snippets here and there of things that may have been passed down. Certainly, they reflect what people were thinking in the Second Temple period. They reflect what people were thinking about what happened back then, right? So when I use those kinds of books, when I use a pseudepigraphical kind of book, I'm not trying to say that this is God's word. I'm trying to say this is what people were understanding or believing in relation to God's word. Okay. And that in and of itself has some value. That can tell me something about what people's mindset was on a particular topic. And I don't have to take it as being God's truth. I simply take it as being this is what they thought. All right. So that's probably where I would leave that. I wish I could give you a more specific answer because I do feel like I probably didn't answer this 100%. But again, if they're Gnostic, so Gnostic writings would come from the Christian era, and it's certainly possible. Okay, I'm not an expert on second or third Enoch, right? But I always want to be very careful. I've read the book of Adam and Eve. It was an amazing read. And I was like, this is it. This fills in all the blanks. Why did I never read this? Okay. But then I discovered that it was probably written around 400 AD, which is very late. And which means here's a little preview here. This is a spoiler. It wasn't written by Adam and Eve. Okay. And that was a real bummer to me. I was like, oh, shoot. I was excited that maybe that's from Adam and Eve, but nope, it wasn't. Okay. So, with that being said, I guess I would be careful with those books. If you want to read them for insight as to what people were thinking, great. But I wouldn't necessarily try to pin those on this came from the time of Enoch. I think that's a very risky kind of thing. And they're not in an ancient language, which that right there tells you that something is off. Okay. This is from Maria. She says, Shalom, Doug. Can you explain the parable Yeshua gave when he said in Matthew 24, when two will be in the field and one will be left, in light of that, you don't believe in a rapture? All right. Well, Maria, I do believe in a rapture. The question is the timing of the rapture. Okay. So I do believe in a rapture. I just want to make that really clear that I absolutely believe, again, and the term rapture, I know that it's fraught with all kinds of challenges from whoever you're talking to. But I do believe that there will be a gathering of God's people at the end of the age. Okay, so because Jesus said so, right? I'm gonna read this to you guys. Therefore, if they say, "Look, he's in the desert," do not go out. Look, he's in the inner rooms. Do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Okay, and he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather. So there's the gathering, right? So I see the gathering as happening after the tribulation, right? And I think that to me seems to be the most straightforward reading you can have of Matthew 24 and all of the things that Paul said and all the things that we see in Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and all these other passages that talk about a gathering. If you want to learn more about this, I encourage you to pick up my book that I did with Chris Steinley, Reclaiming the Rapture, and I think that will be a lot of fun. All right, so let's keep going, right? Because your question really has to do with verse 40. All right, so you got things going on. For as in the days of the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. All right. So when these people are taken is the time at which the Lord is coming. Okay. The Lord is coming. All right. Not for a secret pre-tribulation rapture, but he's actually coming for the end times. Okay, so in Second Thessalonians chapter 2, written by Paul, now brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or in troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter from us, as though the day of Christ had come. So the day of Christ is the day that he comes back, and that is when the gathering happens. Okay, so we have clearly a gathering that's going to take place when the Lord comes back. But we also know, and I think this is in Matthew 13. I'm going to cheat. Okay, so, all right, Matthew 3. There's a few passages. This is in Matthew 13 too. We'll look at them. All right, his winnowing fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clean out the threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So, yeah, the question, who's being gathered here, right? That's the big question. Well, let's take a look at a few other passages. All right, so let both grow together until the harvest, and at the time of harvest, again, this is the second coming, the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So here he tells us, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them. So based on this, if we only read this, it would certainly sound like the first people to be gathered or to be taken will be the bad guys. Okay, first gather the tares so they can be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Hence, they come second. So that seems to be the case. All right, seems pretty powerful to me. Okay, so that is probably where I would land on that question. Is that he says first gather the tares. So based on Matthew 24, there'll be 2 out there. One will be taken, the other will be left, because who is he taking first? The bad guys, right? So that doesn't at all, Matthew 24 does not support a pre-tribulation rapture. And we're going to talk about this on Prophecy Roundtable this week. I'm looking forward to getting into the question of the pre-tribulation rapture. All right, because I think it's important that we go over the supposed list of all the places where it talks about the pre-tribulation rapture. And I'm going to show that list that many people tout, that I used to say, well, look at this list, right? Look at all these passages that are talking about the pre-tribulation rapture. And yet when you look at each one of the verses, you're like, wait, there's nothing here. It's just smoke and mirrors. Okay. So we certainly don't want to go there. All right. Thank you, Maria. This is from Justin. Greetings from Minnesota. Appreciate all you do, Doug. We're extremely thankful for your content and engagement. Thank you. I enjoyed some banter on a recent prophecy roundtable and would like to hear any insight or comment you may glean from Joseph and the 7 years of plenty, famine, the parable of the 10 virgins, and an observation I've made about the word overcometh, as it appears in the King James Version 10 times, 8 of those in Revelation. Chuck Missler had a way of saying that we are about to be plunged into a period in time the Bible speaks of more than any other time. Whether that's a factor or not, I'm not sure. It can be debatable. So I'm curious, what does being wise and overcoming in relation to the end times look like to you? Well, yeah, to be he who overcomes and remains to the end, right? So we're supposed to be faithful to the end. What does that mean? I mean, that's a great question. Okay, if the end times are upon us, well, first of all, it means that I'm not going to deny my faith. I'm not going to use my lips to deny my Lord. Okay. Now we can also deny God, even though our lips may say, yes, I believe in God. right? Did we not say to you, Lord, Lord? I mean, he'll say, depart from me. I never knew you, workers of lawlessness. Okay, so it's not merely saying Jesus with our lips or saying God or Bible or Christian or any of these various terms. It's not simply that. Are those things important? Sure. Right. And we don't want to go around denouncing God with our words or Jesus with our words. So we want to be very careful. So that, I think, is at least step one, is to let our words, be yes or be no, whatever we're saying, that we would be honest with our words. But secondly, and I think probably you could argue more importantly, is that my actions should definitely follow my words. So if I claim to believe in God, then my actions ought to follow the Lord. Right now, I don't know that it's going to be any different specifically for the end times, but there's going to be a huge time of testing, right? And there'll be a lot of pressure put on. Sometimes the pressure can be really a good thing because it gets us out of that rut, it gets us out of that stupor, out of that place of not being hot or cold, where God just wants to spit us out of his mouth, right? So sometimes, some pressure can be a good thing, even though it's uncomfortable in the time. It can actually help us to do the right thing in the end. So, being wise, stay in the word, stay close to the Lord, do what he says to do. And that's so easy to say, right? And this is something that, speaking of trials, I mean, I don't like my trials, but I also like my trials because I know that the Lord is using every obstacle in my path to get me to look to him. And I truly want to be transformed. So I am, on the one hand, grateful that these things keep coming. And what's happening is it helps me to learn to relax, to stand and see the salvation of the Lord. I'm going to teach about this on Shabbat. We're going to talk about Saul and how Saul, he started off well, but then when he was faced with a trial of 30,000 Philistines, he kind of started freaking out. And when Samuel didn't show up at the moment that he thought he should, Saul decided to take things into his own hands instead of standing and seeing the salvation of the Lord. So, having done all to stand, stand therefore, right? And that's a super important principle. What does it mean to stand? It means to have poise, right? That even though I see this huge crisis coming at me, I'm going to stand there. I'm going to confidently know that God is with me and that he told me that I can overcome a troop, right? Though 10,000 come against me, I'm going to keep my cool. Now, to be fair with Saul, he only had 600 men and the Philistines had 30,000 men. I can see why he might have been wanting to freak out at that point. But of course, he shouldn't. And I'll have to leave the rest of that for my sermon on Saturday. So, I would say just being faithful to the Lord, staying true to what he's called us to do is probably the most important thing. All right. This is from Brenda. When Yeshua turned the water into wine, is that the same kind of wine as we drink today? That is to say, is the alcohol content the same, or did they ferment it differently? I have heard that it was unfermented grape juice. All right. Good question, Brenda. I want us to go to the passage in John. All right, so this is in John chapter 2, right? This is where he does his first miracle. All right, so let's check this out. All right, and the quick answer is no, it was not grape juice. Okay, that wasn't even invented until Welch came up with Welch's grape juice, right? Because that was a process of pasteurization that had not been invented. So every grape juice, whenever time you press the grapes, they automatically started to turn into wine. That's just the way it was. It took maybe 3 weeks for it to be completely wine. Okay, so they have no wine. All right, so of course, I think you guys know the story. Fill the water pots with water. They fill them to the brim. Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. All right, so let's let the master of the feast decide whether this is real wine or if it's grape juice. Okay, we'll go with whatever he says. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior, right? You have kept the good wine until now. Okay, why would you put out the good stuff first and then the inferior wine? Because when they've had some alcohol and now they're happy and maybe a little bit tipsy, then you bring out the lesser stuff, and guess what? They're not any the wiser, because they're slightly, or maybe a lot, I don't know, inebriated, because it's wine. All right. So then you bring out the lesser, the cheaper stuff, because nobody's going to notice. But he says, you've kept the good wine until now. So the master of the feast, he knows a good wine when he tastes it. And he's saying, this is the best, right? I would have expected you to bring this at the first, but you brought the best stuff. You kept the good stuff until now. So the master of the feast clearly believes that the water that Jesus turned into wine was actual wine, that it was not grape juice. Again, there was no such thing as grape juice until Welch came up with the whole process of pasteurization, etc. So I laugh because I remember years ago hearing a pastor, a Calvary Chapel pastor, who was just adamant that you're not allowed to drink any alcohol whatsoever, and wine really just means grape juice. And it's so far from the truth. It's one of these things you're like, do I really have to defend this? I mean, it's just so far out there, you know. But these are some of the thoughts that people get. So it was real wine. It was not grape juice. Again, you squish the grapes and they automatically start turning into wine. Okay, they start to ferment automatically. If you don't believe me, go buy yourself a thing of freshly squeezed apple cider and leave it in your fridge for a little bit. And guess what? It's going to turn into vinegar, or kind of something alcoholic, right? So just give it time, and it will be there eventually. All right. Thanks for the question. All right, this is from Diana. Would you discuss the taking of communion? How often should we do this? If it's based on Yeshua's Last Supper with the disciples, is it just for Passover? So, Diana, I do believe that what Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, that he was specifically talking about Passover. So this is certainly a question that we've had at the Way congregation. How often should we do communion? Well, certainly once a year, right? Why once a year? Because that's when Passover is. But then I would say certainly twice a year, because at the time of Yom Kippur, going into it, what are we remembering? We're remembering his death, right? He became the Yom Kippur sacrifice as well, right? And that's the whole thing that you see in the book of Hebrews, right? That he took his own blood. The high priest would go once a year into the holy place. Jesus took his blood into the holy place, not made of hands, that is not of his creation, but into the heavenly tabernacle, right? So he did that as a fulfillment of Yom Kippur. So we actually take communion the evening before Yom Kippur starts, and we remember what he did for us. So we certainly do it twice a year. But then we also want to do it, we decided to do it every quarter, because that way it keeps us just remembering what he did. So I don't think that there's any right or wrong amounts, well, at least twice, in my opinion. I know some churches do it every week, some do it every month, some do it every quarter. And I don't know that any one of those is right or wrong. The reason we don't do it every week at the Way congregation, one, I don't believe it's necessary to do that. Two, I never want it to become stale. I always want it to be something that's fresh. So, when we do it every week, I find there's a tendency for it to become rote, that this is our tradition, that's what we do. And so therefore, we just do that. And we can kind of forget what is the significance of that. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe we should do it every month, maybe every week. I don't know. I'm certainly open to ideas, but that's our position on the taking of communion. And yes, I do think that it is specifically all about Passover. Very good. This is from Justin. Over the years, I found this incredibly helpful. It's a timeline map with verses. So if anybody wants to look at that, it is on the app. You can check that out. Okay, Jamie, do you think there's any validity to the gap theory that would have occurred between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 with the fall of Satan? Jamie, I do not. I do not think there's any validity to the gap theory whatsoever. Now, I know that the gap theory is very popular with a lot of people, but let's go over to Genesis chapter 1 so that we can take a deep dive into that. All right, so let me pull up the Hebrew so we can take a better look here. Now, I talk about the lack of the gap theory in Corrupting Image Volume 2, right? And I'm not specifically trying to talk about the gap theory, but I do address it to a lesser degree. If you're still interested in this, I wrote a book called The First 6 Days. That was my second book. That one came out in 2007 when my son was born. So in 2007, I came out with First 6 Days. So I do talk about the gap theory in that book. All right, but let me just show really quick here. And I want you to understand the Hebrew. I'll do my best to explain it to you. All right, so Bereshit bara Elohim. All right, so this is what we call the standard biblical Hebrew grammar. It's the standard form. The verb comes first, followed by the subject. Okay, the subject is the person who's doing it, right? Obviously, the verb is the action. So the action comes first, followed by the subject. That is standard biblical Hebrew. All right. What is not standard is in verse 2, where it says, Ve haaretz haita tohu vavohu, right? So now we have the subject. First, we have the word and, ve, followed by the subject, haaretz, the earth, and then it's followed by the verb, right? That is not standard biblical Hebrew, right? That's not what we find. But what this is a parenthetical statement. It's a parenthesis, okay? So verse 1 is telling us, okay, here's what God did. Verse 2 is telling us, by the way, here's some additional information so that you understand what verse 1 is talking about, all right? So when it says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, by the way, the earth was without form and void. All right. So when he created the earth in verse 1, it's not the ball of dirt that we're sitting on today. It was something different. Okay. I'm actually talking about this in a book on prayer I'm writing as well, because I talk about quantum physics and it's really exciting. All right. And I think it's important for us to understand this. What quantum physics brings to this understanding is they talk about potentiality. Right, that first there is a what's called a ball of potentiality, a cloud of potentiality. And this cloud of potentiality can become anything. And what does it require? Well, it requires somebody observing it. Okay, now check this out. Right, now God says, let all these things be. And then what happened? And it says, and God saw the light, that it was good. God saw, right? And then the next thing he does, right? And God, let's see, and thus, and God called from heaven, so they mean we're on the second day. All right, so God sees, he sees 7 times, right? And God saw that it was good. That's exactly what quantum physics has discovered is necessary to take this state of potentiality that an electron or whatever can, matter. It doesn't have any particular shape or form until it's observed. That's exactly what quantum physics has discovered, and that's exactly what the Bible says. So by the word earth here, don't think of it as, terra firma that we're sitting on today, but think of it as something that is in merely a state of potentiality that is going to be formed and it's going to be observed, right? And that is then going to put it in a concrete form instead of an abstract form. Right. So this is a parenthetical statement. Now the earth, right? Ve'ha'aretz. Now the earth was. That's really what we're getting at. This is telling you the condition of the earth. It has nothing to do whatsoever with the supposed destruction and then recreation of the earth and that Satan fell in that time. I've heard that theory. I think it's absolutely bunk. All right. I really do. I have no respect for it. I know people teach it. I've met those guys, and God bless them. Okay, that's all I can say. But I don't think their theory holds any validity. It doesn't hold any grammatical validity. We don't see this supposed fall of Satan before God created things in the rest of the Bible. We just don't see it. So now again, others can make their case. I disagree with them. So I don't think that has anything to do with anything. I think this is basically, let's put it another way. If you were to come to a construction site, right, and you saw a bunch of cement trucks, what's inside the cement? Well, the building is in the cement truck, right? But inside the cement truck, what shape is it? It has no particular shape. It's sloshing around in that big cement truck, right? And then they pour it out and it goes into a mold and it becomes the building. But as long as it's in the cement truck, there's no particular shape and no particular form. That's what is behind this whole idea of tohu vavohu. Now, the other thing that a gap theorist will tell you is they're going to say that the earth became without form and void. Now, that is an error. That would be the nephal of the word to be. And there is such a form. It's not very common, but it is in the Bible. And this is simply the past tense. So it didn't go from being one thing to being something else. It didn't become something. It simply was something. That's the difference, right? So again, I think the gap theory fails royally when it comes to Hebrew grammar, and then I think it also fails when it comes to biblical history, as we look throughout Scripture to find evidence of this supposed fall before the creation of man. We don't see that. And the last thing, in the very book of Genesis chapter 1, what does God say? Well, let's read it, right? And God saw the light that it was good. Oh, okay. So he saw that it was good. Everything in here is good. And God saw that it was good, right? Everything here is good. Okay. That's great, right? And God saw that it was good, right? I think you're getting the idea here. And God saw that it was good, right? Now, if Satan had already fallen at this point, it doesn't sound so good to me. In fact, it sounds pretty lousy. It sounds like it's really bad, right? And then at the end of the sixth day, everything was indeed very good. Wow. Okay. So thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done and rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So everything was very, very good. So this idea that things were bad, that somehow he had created and then Satan had fallen, which is bad, but then suddenly everything was very, very good. I don't see that in Scripture, right? So again, I think it really falls on that premise. Those three premises are the main things there. All right, this is from Iris, Joel 2:28, when it says all flesh. Does that include the nations, or was that specific to Israel? All right, let's look at Joel 2:28. Let's take a look at that. So Joel 2:28, and it should, let me pull this up so you guys can read along with me. All right. And it's going to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Iris, I'm very preferential to say this is going to be all flesh. And I think we actually have some evidence of this happening, where there are many Muslims who are having visions of Jesus, right? So it doesn't say that God is going to put it on every person, but that everybody is at least they're in the raffle. Okay, if you are flesh, if you're human, then you have the potential for God to pour out His Spirit upon you. And now, unless there's something more to that than I'm missing, which could be, but I think this is probably referring to all humanity. All right, at least anybody who wants it is at least seeking somehow. I don't know that He's going to pour out His Spirit on hardcore radical atheists who are just dead set in their ways and they're not going to repent no matter what anybody tells them. I don't know. It seems like probably that's not what He's getting at, in my opinion. Okay, let's go to our next question. Thank you, Eris. Another question from Eris. What is the difference between the law of Moses and the law of God? How do we know what still applies today from the law, and was Adam given the law? Okay, so that's a great one. I actually did an entire presentation on this, and I thought I put it on YouTube somewhere. I can't remember where though. All right, so let me share some of the key passages. These the law of Moses is the law of God, right? So let me share some of those thoughts so that let's see here. Okay. All right. So actually, I'm going to pull this up so you guys can see this. I think that would be probably the best way to go about that. And then you can see it because I got a whole bunch of verses and I could just share these. I already got them in a PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. All right. So Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, my laws, my Torah. All right. So clearly God was giving those to Abraham. Heed the voice of the Lord your God. Do what is right in his sight. Give ear to his commandments and all his statutes. Moses is saying that before God spoke on Mount Sinai. Also in Exodus 16, again, before God spoke on Mount Sinai, the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments, my laws, my Torah, right? Notice here, this is what Moses is saying. He's telling his father-in-law, I make known the statutes of God and his laws. All right. So then we have in Nehemiah, you also came down on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven and gave them just ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments. You made known to them your holy Sabbath and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses, your servant. So the whole idea that Moses had some laws, I think, is really a complete misnomer. Moses himself didn't have any laws. Moses was simply communicating what God's laws were, right? And there's so many other verses that I could point to. Let me just take a moment. I've got so many. Okay, here's a question, right? This is answering your question. What about Adam? Well, we don't have any record that God spoke the laws to Adam. We don't have that. But let's think about this for a second. God's laws don't change. They were same in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve violated many laws that were maybe not yet revealed when they disobeyed. So they placed either Satan or themselves as gods before Yehovah, right? So don't have any other gods. They believed a slanderous report of God by Satan, so they took God's name in vain. They dishonored their father. They broke number 5. They enacted their own death and their descendants. That's murder. That's number 6. They took something prohibited. That's called stealing. Okay. They bore false witness against God. That's number 9. And they coveted something that wasn't there. So they broke at least these commandments. Maybe we could argue they broke all the commandments. I don't know. But they at least broke these commandments, even though maybe God had not yet spoken them or codified them or formalized these laws. They were still laws that are true, right? And that's what makes something a law, is that it's true, right? And that's why laws are immutable. At least God's laws are immutable because they are true. They're reality of how the world is. And that's how that works. Okay, so the law of God is the law of Moses. There really is no difference. These are the statutes and judgments and laws which the Lord made between himself and the children of Israel on Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses. These are the commands which the Lord commanded Moses, right? And again, so many. I don't want to beat this dead horse here, but there's so many, the commandments of the judgments which the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses, right? So there's so many where Moses is not the author of these things. He's the communicator of these things. He helped to write them down. He helped to pass them on to the people, but their origin was from God himself. Okay, great, fantastic. That was an excellent question. All right, let me get to the other remaining questions here. Let's see. So this is from, let's see, let me come back to that. All right, this is from Mark. Is there a difference between the first day of unleavened bread in Exodus 12 versus Leviticus 23? Mark, I'm not sure if there's a difference. I don't think there's a difference. So maybe you have to suggest if there's something more to kind of spark my memory, if there's something else I'm supposed to know about that. Okay, this is from Christy Coates. Doug, please research a summit that was during the week of the blasphemy of the new 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai by the Pope and other religious leaders. Okay, I had a feeling maybe that was what was going on. I've not looked into that. I've only heard about it. So, well, I guess if there's, let's see, new 10 Commandments. Let me just look it up. And then we can kind of go from there. Let's see. I'm not aware. And I will say this is that we, well, let me see. Let me just see what the supposed 10 Commandments are. That would probably be the easiest. I'm looking at an article. It doesn't seem to be giving me. This is Jerusalem Post. They are not identifying. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't see what those are, except, be good to the earth. Yeah, I can't comment because I don't know enough about him at the moment. So sorry about that. Okay, but if somebody has a link, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I will take a look at that. Not a video, but like where I can actually see what these are listed as. So there we go. Okay, this is from Mark. Leviticus 23 first day is a V15, and Exodus 12 a V14. Mark, I don't really get into the numbers. I think we can go back and forth, in my humble opinion, about all that different stuff. But yeah, well, I would encourage you to look into how the rabbis address such differences, because I'm sure that they have noticed if there's a difference and what they've done about it. They might have just put them both together to solve any problems. And that's probably what I would do too. I would probably harmonize them and just go with that. Okay. So this is David. The Pope wrote 10 new commandments, new 10 commandments of climate change with global religious leaders on the Catholic Mount Sinai believed the old needed an update. Well, I really doubt that the Pope is against the 10 commandments in the Bible. To whatever his remarks were, he's probably trying to get some people's reaction to say, hey, we need another 10 commandments regarding climate change. But I highly doubt that he's suddenly against the actual 10 commandments. So I guess I would be very careful. I'd be a little cautious about suggesting that he's getting rid of the original 10 commandments, because I think that would be absolutely antithetical to the Catholic faith. I just don't think that's what he would have been talking about. But so I'd encourage more investigation on that topic. Okay, this is from Lewis. Please explain the New Testament verse, since it enters not his heart but his stomach and is expelled. Thus he declared all foods clean. Yeah, so Lewis, there's a simple answer. I'd encourage you to go to Leviticus chapter 11, where God defines what is food. Okay, so in Mark 7, where Jesus is having a conversation with the Pharisees about food, and really the question is not so much about food, it's more about washing your hands. Okay, so they were saying if you don't wash your hands right, then you're going to sin when you put food in your mouth. Did they consider pork to be food? No, they did not. Okay, they did not. So there was never a question of, can I eat pork? No, that was never, ever the question. It was all about washing hands. That was the real question that they were discussing. And so then it was about, how do you wash your hands? If you don't wash your hands properly, then you might put some contaminant when you're eating that piece of steak, beef steak that is, or chicken, but not pork. When you're eating that and it goes into your mouth, and then somehow it's going to come out. And Jesus' point is, look, it's all going to come out in the toilet. So don't worry about that as far as washing your hands goes. That was the real discussion. Now, I know people have tried to look at the Greek and say, well, it really doesn't say this or that. I think that's an irrelevant argument. I think the real argument is, what is food, right? What is food? And Jesus was certainly following what the Torah had to say, because Jesus wrote the Torah. So whatever food is defined as, that's the question. You can't suddenly say that, well, now pork is food. That was never, ever the case, right? He never, ever said that. And I don't think we have any suggestion to suggest that it was somehow different. Okay, this is from Marvo. What do you think of the third temple being rebuilt in Israel? Well, I'm not aware that there is one being rebuilt yet. I know there are plans to rebuild it, but I don't think we're there yet. So it'll be a big deal when that actually does happen. I don't think that we're there. All right, this is from Paul. Doug, they're worshiping the earth and asking forgiveness for the abomination of ruining it. And this is from Pope that got El Garcito, or whatever it is that he's trying to do, Legato C. Okay, so we can certainly go way too far with people that worship the earth and all that stuff. Not good. Okay, I want to just give you guys a perspective from the book of Isaiah. We're going to go to Isaiah 24. Okay, it's interesting here. So Isaiah 24. So look, again, I don't want us to worship the earth. We need to be very careful, but we also need to take care of the earth. Okay, so I'm not opposed to taking care of the earth, but I don't want to worship it. So the Lord has spoken, the earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. The earth, right? Here's the word ve'ha'aretz. The earth is also defiled under its inhabitants because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinances, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, the curse has devoured the earth, and those who dwell in it are desolate. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. Well, so look, we do not want to worship the earth. Bad idea, okay? But I live on the earth. You live on the earth. Let's be good to the earth. That's all I have to say, right? I just want to, take care of this nice, beautiful place that God's given us, and that's that. Okay, so I think I've seen really different extremes. I've seen some born again Christians saying, we don't need to do anything to the earth, it's all going to burn, and I disagree with that. I think that we should be good stewards of the planet God gave us. Now, I don't want to go to the other extreme where we start worshiping the earth and we're hugging every tree out there, right? Because I don't want to do that either. All right, so I want to worship God, and God has told me how to treat the planet. So I want to be a good steward of what he's given me. No more and no less. Okay, so that's where I want to stand on that. All right, guys, thank you so much. Glad that you joined me. Again, come with us to Israel, April 2024. You can also go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give price of a cup of coffee or as much as you want to help support this ministry. Thank you. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. And until